In this video, we're going to be introducing integers and absolute value. So integers are positive and negative whole numbers. So whole numbers. So that means that integers cannot be a decimal. And that means that they also can't be a fraction that turns into a decimal. So if you think about the fraction like 10 over 2, well, fraction bar means division. So 10 divided by 2 gives you 5. That is an integer. Whereas if I look at the fraction of a half, if I were to divide a half, 1 divided by 2, I get a decimal of 0.5. This is not an integer because it can only be a whole number. 0.5 or 5/10 is not a whole number. Okay, so it has to be a whole number. A positive integer is a number that is greater than 0. And a negative integer is a number that is less than 0. And all the negatives are located to the left of 0. So you can think left is less. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is absolute value. And absolute value is the distance from 0 on a number line. And distance is always positive. So this absolute value is always going to be positive. Okay, so let's look at some integers. So you can show that an integer is positive by writing a plus sign in front of it. Or you can show it is greater than 0 if it just doesn't have a sign. So think back to elementary school, the number 3 that you've worked with since kindergarten. The number 3 is technically assumed to be a positive number. Now you show that a number is negative by writing a negative sign in front of it. So if I look at this little graphic that I have here, this arrow is pointing to this negative, and I want you to actually write the word negative 2. And then this one here is pointing to this positive 2. And then the number in the middle, that's going to be 0. Now 0 is interesting because 0 is neither positive nor negative. It's neither of them. 0 just kind of sits in the middle as the balancing point of the number line for where the positives change over to the negatives. Okay, so let's talk about sorting numbers into positive and negative. Positive numbers are just your plain numbers. Negative numbers have that negative sign. So if we look at the first one, negative 12, with that little minus sign in front of it, that's a negative number. I'm going to cross it out because I used it. The next one is 7. That's a positive number. 14 is positive. This 9 with the negative sign in front of it, that's a negative number. Go ahead and finish the rest of those really quickly. So you have negative 22 goes here, 17, 29, 50, negative 1, and then 4. So that's what yours should have looked like. Now on the next page, we're going to talk about if they are actually integers. And remember, if in order to be an integer, they have to be a positive or a negative whole number. They can't be a decimal or divide to become a decimal. So if I look at the first one, this negative 5, is it a whole number? Yes, it is, so it is an integer. Now this one, 2.5, I have this decimal of 0.5 here. I can't have a decimal, so that is not an integer. Now, negative 4.8, it is negative, I'll give that to it, but can 0.8 be an integer? Well, no. because an integer can only be a whole number. So this negative 4.8 is technically not an integer. And then 10 divided by 5, that's really 2, because 10, a fraction bar with a 5 is a division symbol. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So this one is an integer. Okay. I want you to try the rest on your own. If you need to, go ahead and pause the video real quick. So I have 4 is an integer. 1/2 is not an integer because that's 0.5. 3.1 is not an integer. Negative 3 is an integer, it's a whole number. 7 is an integer, and so is negative 50. Okay. Next thing we're going to talk about is absolute value. Remember we said absolute value is that distance from 0. How far away on a number line is 10 from 0? Well, it's 10 spaces away. How far away is negative 62? That's what these bars mean. Absolute value of negative 62 would just be 62 spaces away. Absolute value of 29. How many spaces away from 0 is 29? Well, it's 29 spaces. Absolute value of negative 8 would be 8 spaces away. Absolute value of 25 would be 25 spaces away. And then absolute value of negative 1/2. Well, it's only going to be 1/2 spaces away from 0. Go ahead, pause. Do 7, 8, and 9 on your own. So this one's going to be 2.5 spaces away, 47 spaces away, and 15. Now, an important thing I want you to remember is that absolute value is not the opposite sign, and that's where most students fall into the trap. Absolute value does not mean the opposite sign. Absolute value turns numbers positive because distance is positive. Absolute value is that distance from 0. All right, last thing we're going to talk about on this page is ordering and comparing integers. And if you need to use a number line, you're more than welcome to use it to help. Just make sure you're able to draw one. 0 goes in the middle. So we have our symbols. We have a greater than, we have a less than, and we have an equal to. Well, if I use the number line for help, I can think of the left is the lesser sign, and the right is the greater sign. So the further left a number is on a number line, the less it is, and the further right a number is on the number line, the greater it is. So if I have the number 3 and I have the number negative 7, technically, negative 3 is greater because it's closer to the right, and left, the further left number would be less. So this symbol should go that direction. Negative 3 is greater than negative 7. If you look at number 1, and you can use the number line for help, I can say that negative 4 would be here. Negative 4 would go here, and negative 3 is here. Negative 4 is less than negative 3. These two are equal to each other. And then 0 is less than 1. What I would like for you to do is I want you to do number 4, 5, and 6. Be careful with number 6. So for this one, a positive 2 is greater than a negative 1. Same thing here, a positive 2 is greater than a negative 3. Now for number 6, it says solve the absolute value first. So this one in hiding is really 7. So these ones should be equal to each other, because the absolute value of negative 7 is positive 7. All right, last thing we're going to talk about is ordering. And you can use a number line to help you with ordering if you need it. We're going to order these integers from least to greatest. And remember, we always have to take the absolute value first and then put it back into its original form. So the absolute value of 2 is going to be 2. Now I can use the number line for help. So I'm going to practice, and if you decide you don't need it later on, that's fine. So I have a -6, a -9, a +7, and that +2. And I'm going to remember that that's the absolute value because I have to write it that way, so I don't lose points on my quiz or my test. All right, and I'm going from least. We remember the left is the less and the right is the greater. So if I go least to greatest, it's -9, -6, absolute value of 2, and then our +7. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, especially when you use a number line. Okay, let's look at number 8. I need to take those absolute values first, so that's going to be 2, and this one's going to be 3. Put them on the number line. Well, I'm going to put 2 on here, but whenever I put 2 on here, I'm going to write it so I don't forget. Absolute value of -2. Same thing for the 3. I'm going to write it as absolute value of 3. I have 8. And then I have -3. I'm still going least to greatest, so left is less, right is greater. So I have -3, 2, oh, absolute value. And then I have that 3, and then I have 8. You go ahead and try number 9 on your own. So take it out of absolute value first. So this is really +9. And I'm going to put it on the number line, but I'm going to write that it's the absolute value of 9 so I don't forget it in its original form. I have a 7, I have a -7, and I have a 3. Least is left, greater is right. -7, 3, +7, and the absolute value of 9. All right, last little bit of this video is we are going to talk about absolute value. So with absolute value, we're just doing true or false statements. So the absolute value of -6 is +6. Is 6 greater than 8? No. So this one's false. Absolute values first. So this one would be absolute value of -5 is +5. Absolute value of regular 5 is still 5 spaces. Remember, absolute value is that distance from 0, if you need to make a note. So is 5 less than -5? Nope, that's false, because they're equal to. Absolute value of 12 would be 12. Is 12 less than 2? Nope, so that one's also false. Why don't you go ahead and try 13, 14, and 15? So the absolute value of -3 is +3. Is 20 less than 3? Nope, false. Absolute value of -6 is +6. Is -3 greater than +6? Nope. And then the last one, absolute value of -43 is +43, distance from 0. And is -43 equal to +43? Nope. So they were all false. I know, it was pretty lame. If you have any questions, make sure you reach out to your teacher so they can make sure they go over this with you.